Hi, I'm Arthur, and today we are going to be learning about the Space Marine Legion that may in fact be the most capable of all the original legions. No, I'm not lying. After reading the metric buttload of lore for the Dark Angels and all they have done, I have to say that at least as the 30k and Horus Heresy era is concerned, the Dark Angels are basically a super weapon, which I think is a good space to start. So who exactly are the Dark Angels? They are one of the 20 original groupings of Space Marines, and the first one to technically have their Primarch discovered. A man by the name of Lion L. Johnson. No, not Lionel, I mean Lion Space L. Johnson. He is a pragmatic man, almost to his own detriment from time to time. He was discovered on the planet of Caliban, a death world that was tainted by the energies of the warp, causing literal monsters to be a natural occurrence on the planet. Quite literally fantasy monstrosities that would be at home in a Tolkien book. Massive wolves and scaled beasts, one of the most dangerous being the Calibanite lion. Fun fact about the Calibanite lion, it is so dangerous that only Lion L. Johnson and one other man have killed one. Just one. So, as the story goes, the lion landed on the planet as a baby and for a few years survived in the wild until he was found and brought into an order of Techno Knights, which is cool as all hell, that in very short order he became the leader of. Skipping a few years, him and his surrogate father, Luther, banded together all the knights to kill everything in the forest of Caliban until they weren't a problem anymore, which apparently worked. Go figure. Which is going to be a consistent theme for the Dark Angels you're going to see, that they don't do half measures. They make sure a problem is solved with brutal efficiency and equally brutal tactics. Post killing all the woodland critters, and kind of feeling a bit big dick about the whole affair, the Emperor of Mankind just appears. Tells the lion he is his true papa, making Luther silently mauled in the background, brought the lion back to Terra, and boom! Told him to lead his legion of Space Marines to accomplish the most difficult tasks that needed doing. Binding the legion together under the more knightly aesthetics of the orders on Caliban, actually making some of his order into pseudo-Astartes, which is an odd process. Essentially, because Space Marines have to be created from a young age, when you have people who are 20 plus, you can't really make them into full Space Marines. So the term half Astartes gets thrown around, where they're given as many of the augmentations and chemical treatments as possible, but not truly being a full Space Marine. I don't believe they have a progenoid, but it depends from person to person. So with the preamble out of the way, there is two major things you need to know about the Dark Angels to understand them. Firstly, the Hexagrammaton, and secondly, the Fallen. The Hexagrammaton is the 6 divine wings of the Legion, and also the reason why the Dark Angels were the strongest Legion, period. Where the other legions had a single specialty mixed with generalist tactics, the Dark Angels had 6 divisions, each specializing in a different aspect of warfare in order to cover all the bases and being the best at everything. Need some heavily armored attrition fighters? Call in the Deathwing. Need some speedy recon shock troops to ride in on grav bikes and normal bikes? Raven Wing. Dedicated war crimes division affixed with radioactive grenades and white phosphorus bombs? Oh baby! The Dreadwing literally has you covered. The Fire Wing for hyper-specialized aspects to war like assassination, scouting, and the more subtle aspects of it. Iron Wing has all the tanks and heavy hitters like dreadnoughts. And lastly, the Storm Wing. Okay, this one actually is kind of a generalist division. It's mentioned in several pieces of literature that I read that it's like boots on the ground, guns in the hand, standard Marine division, but they also handle some degrees of ordnance, so I would assume like heavy mortars and heavier cannons, but on an individual basis rather than cannons. So basically a guy with a massive fuck you rocket launcher. They also are used to cover training of new recruits from what I've been reading. Using the Hexagrammaton, they were able to single out the best way to deal with any individual threat, then just deal with it accordingly, leading to them being used as essentially, as I mentioned before, a superweapon. There are so many accounts of them dealing with threats so dangerous that if any other legions were to even consider fighting them, it would be considered a suicide. It doesn't mean it was easily accomplished for them. It just means that they were the only ones whom could probably do it. So with the Hexagrammaton out of the way, let's discuss the other main factor of the Dark Angels that makes them kind of distinct in the lore as well as just as a faction. So that's the Fallen, and the Fallen are complicated. During the Horus Heresy, half the legions sided with Horus, and the other half sided with the Emperor. Traitor and Loyalist is usually how it's divided. In the case of the Dark Angels, it was both. Due to the Lion becoming so good at everything so fast, his surrogate father became quite jealous. This jealousy ended up worming its way into his brain like a cancer and growing. Couple that with the fact that you had the forces of chaos whispering in his ears, and boom! He convinced about half the Legion that the Lion was a fucking moron, and they all abandoned the Dark Angels. The Loyalist Dark Angels, understandably, took that a bit personally. Less understandably, they dedicated the better half of 10,000 years to trying to find every last fallen angel and snuffing them out as painfully as humanly possible. They keep the identity of the Fallen a complete secret to the majority of even their own legion, only the inner sanctums of the Dark Angels knowing anything about them, because in the eyes of the Greater Imperium, the Dark Angels are incorruptible. So to have it be revealed that they are in fact corruptible, and half of them were, would probably be bad for their public image. And I mean worse than routinely taking people and torturing them forever. Now all of that is the ancient history of the Dark Angels, and in modern day, things have shuffled around a little bit. To start, the Dark Angels, as they are now, are kind of Codex compliant, meaning they did dismantle the Hexagrammaton style of organization and formatted it into the 10-company command structure with a few tweaks, meaning they still kept some of the aspects of the Hexagrammaton intact. Alongside that, a lot of things that I've been reading have pointed to the fact that they only do the Codex compliant command structure just for appearances, so that they can have less suspicion directed to them about their goings on. The first company is basically the same as every other first company to every other chapter, where it is the elites, the veterans. The first company are called the Deathwing, still maintaining the same armor color as they did in the Horus Heresy, a bone white. The big difference between their first company and other first companies is the entire first company is affixed with Terminator armor, which is basically like Space Marine armor plus plus. The second company is the Raven Wing, still maintaining the same black armor from back in the Horus Heresy days. The Raven Wing company for the second company is essentially the same as they were in the Hexagrammaton, where they are all speedy bikers and land speeders and just trying to do hit and run tactics. After that, it's pretty much the same with a little bit more specification. Well, the reserve companies do have specifications to them, so I believe the 8th company is the assault company, so it's very melee focused, but from companies 2 to 5, they are battle companies, like it is discussed in the Codex Astartes. 6 and 7 are tactical companies, which have tactical marines, which is basically just the boots on the ground type guy. Once again, guns in hand, boots on ground, point and shoot type deal. Aside from that, basically the same command structure. Apothecaries, reserve companies, heavy armor, 10th company's the scout company, so on and so forth. It definitely lacks the hyper-specialized might of the Legion era of the Dark Angels, but they do tend to have more generalistic tactics now, which I suppose you could say is a dilution of what they once were, which kind of ruins the whole thing. I could definitely see that argument. I'm not here to make that. Another more interesting feature of the modern Dark Angels is they have several different titles that are not included in the Codex Astartes. The titles that differ in the Dark Angels For one, they don't refer to the head of a company as a captain, they refer to them as a company master, with the heads of the first and second company being called the Grand Masters, because they are currently leading 2 of the remaining wings of the Hexagrammaton. Then you have what would be considered the chapter master, which is not the captain of the first company, but supersedes the entire hierarchy, and he is the supreme grand master, and that's Azrael. On top of that, they have a very specific rank of chaplain. So you have your standard chaplaincy, and then you have above that the interrogator chaplains. Remember those religious nut jobs who beat people to death with an electric stick? Yeah, imagine them, but like meaner. Like, their whole job is basically to track down and torture Space Marines until they break down, which I should note is not a fucking easy task. This is all done in the hopes of getting a scrap of information about where the Fallen may be. And if you are a Fallen, oh fuck, I hope you didn't like having fingernails or teeth. You're gonna be put through probably the worst pain possible. I remember specifically a torture scene of someone who wasn't even a Fallen. It was being done by Asmodai, and it was in an audio drama that I had read so long ago, I can't even remember the name of it. And the shit that was being described made me honestly squirm in my chair. It was something like pumping the victim full of chemicals to keep them awake, breaking bones and fitting them with specialized casts so they never grew back. And the one that I remember that got me the most was Asmodai, whom, by the way, not a nice guy, really not a nice guy. He had these specific blades that were like 1 inch in width and like 3 feet long that he inserted between the thumb and index finger of the Space Marine that he was torturing until it slid all the way down inside his wrist through his bones and then popped out his elbow on the other end. Even describing that and reminding the sound that it made in the audio drama, just like, it brings back those memories. Asmodai is a bit of a meme outside of that, where he regularly speedruns getting promoted to head interrogator chaplain and then demoted for doing something too fucked up. Which, by the way, the thumb forefinger thing, that wasn't too fucked up. That's just basic what he does. Everything this chapter does is more or less in order to capture the Fallen. And oddly enough, not all the chapter knows about it, like I said before. It's kept secret by only the closest brothers on the innermost circle of the chapter. The last thing to really note about the chapter, without getting into too much specifics, is that they are so secretive that they have actually maintained some of the weapons from their war crimes division from ye olden days, having a bunch of ancient plasma technology and weapons from the dark ages of technology. In lore, it means a lot of them have bigger and meaner guns. On the tabletop, it means if you've seen this fucking thing across the table from you, then boy howdy, you know how hard they fucking hit. With that, I think that covers the basics. Personally, I went into this knowing very little to nothing about the Dark Angels, as they were one of the chapters that I just wasn't that interested in aesthetically. And upon learning a lot of this lore, I found it to be very intriguing. Now, I'm not covering everything that I learned, or this video would be way longer than I want to put out. And also, I want to cover things more in depth later. They definitely aren't my favorite chapter, but I do have a bit more of a respect for the weird dedication to the bit they have at keeping this Fallen a secret and also, like, murdering them. So yeah, as I said, I know I didn't even talk about things like the Rock, Azrael. I mean, I touched on Azrael a little bit. Any of the more important characters, or like the fact that in the lore currently, the Lion is just gonna pop out of some random hole he was hiding in after sustaining quite a violent injury from a surrogate father in a fight about 10,000 years ago. I just want to touch the basics of the aesthetics, the essentials of the chapter, and then go into more depth later, because to be fair, the Fallen, as much as an important topic as they are to the Dark Angels, they deserve to be discussed on their own. And Cypher also is just a thing that exists, and it bothers me, and may or may not involve a psyop from the Alpha Legion, but that's a tinfoil hat story for later. For now, I guess let's call it there. What do you all like about the Dark Angels, if you like anything about them? What other things would you have preferred me go into? I'm kind of new at this, so I'm just trying to get a formatting down, and I kind of want to know what you guys like. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, as they always say, because next week we're going to cover the Second Legion and what could have happened to them. Till then, remember, never ask Asmodai about the Fallen, never ask Cypher about how he got out of prison, and never ask anyone what these little fucking jaw